Guys, welcome to episode 2 of the Never Better Pod. I'm Anthony.
And I'm Develyn.
And that's Develyn. Yeah, what are we talking about this week? So, like we told you guys last week, we're going to go back and forth each week, bringing a topic. Last week, I brought Putting Out of Your Mind, which was a lot of fun. Dev, as he said, he's got a bit more of a serious topic for us about toxic masculinity. I'm excited to get into it. Dev, take it on, man. Let's go.
Before we jump in, how are you? How's your week?
Good, man. Yeah, I was actually hoping that we could start by talking about kind of post going live.
Mm-hmm.
I was surprised at how much anxiety I was experiencing after putting that first post up. And it wasn't so much the post because, I mean, like, you know, we had 22 views on YouTube within the first day, like from strangers. That's really nobody. It was when we started to post to our social medias. And, you know, like my favorite song, The Verve, that Supersonic Symphony, I'm a million different people from one day to the next. And there's no clearer example of that than looking through my Instagram and followers. And it's like, oh, here's some old boss I hate here watching my video. And it's just like, I really had to process those feelings and get over it. And I mean, I think this is common with a lot of podcast hosts, like the imposter syndrome. Like there's a million podcasts out there. Like who the fuck cares what I have to say? Like I'm literally an expert on nothing. Let's be really clear about that. But again, like I've talked through this and I've got over it. And I've realized that, you know, this is for us. This is for me and you and our own growth. And if someone benefits from it, great. And we're just going to build organically. But I'm so freaking glad that you've chosen the topic this week so we can show people that, you know, we're actually feminists despite this podcast for men. It's not just for men. I hope everyone listens. But okay, long rant. How was your week?
Yeah, it was good. Yeah, I hope our TikTok algorithm can adjust itself after like figuring out that no, we're feminists here. It might come up later in the discussion about this book. That's the topic for today. But I was a little bit scared by the amount of like alt-right ridiculous like bullshit that came up on our like brand new fresh TikTok page because we're posting about men's mental health. Like very scary and alarming and ties like exactly into why I wanted to discuss this topic this week. But yeah, we can get into that later. Yeah, week's been good. I unfortunately didn't get a great sleep last night because I dived headfirst into that cesspool. That was our For You page last night. But we also went to see Gladiator 2, which was fun. But
yeah, I've heard some critical reviews, which is unfortunate because like what a integral movie to like our childhood. It's iconic, obviously. You've seen the movie. How would you comment on like the feedback I've heard is everyone talks in like a British, Irish, whatever accent. Then there's Denzel just like talking like Denzel.
That's a thing in a lot of those like period piece movies is they don't really like get anybody to have a consistent accent because like what are they all going to do? Put on like a Italian accent? Like it doesn't make sense. So that was like less of a point of contention for me because that existed in the first one as well. For me, there was a few things. I got my mom on the phone this morning and went through an entire list of all the things I was disappointed about. I don't know if she cared, but she was very nice and listened to me talk about my feelings.
Just a quick aside, since you brought up your mom, I want to talk about my mom real quick. So my mom was the only family member I chose to share the first episode of the podcast with. I love my mom. She's amazing. A couple days later, the response from my mom is 2-word text, interesting podcast. And I'm like, okay, all right. Interesting response, Mom. You know, there's a whole different way I could have approached that. An older version of me, I might have like held some resentment over that, or I might have actually more likely, this is me, I would have avoided it entirely. I would have been like, well, that's the last time I send my mom anything. I'm not going to reach out and engage with her. Like I didn't get the support I'm looking for. Fuck that. But evolved Anthony, critical thinking Anthony, self-improvement, mental health, the forefront Anthony chose to like reach out and have some dialogue. And I was like, hey, Mom, I was just wondering if you could like expand some more on what you thought about the podcast. I knew I had an inclination that there was a particular part that she might have found triggering, talking about, mental health issues in my family. So the end result is basically it opened a really great dialogue, and I felt better after for it. And I think most importantly, she felt better after for it. I mean, I can highlight mental health issues in my family. And I can say that I'm incredibly grateful for my girlfriend, but that doesn't mean that I'm not grateful for my mom. Incredibly supportive force in my life who I love. And there wasn't a manual on how to raise kids. And the most important thing was that my brother and I were her priorities throughout our upbringing, and that shows. And, there's one thing to say about the mom you had growing up, and then there's something to say about the mom you have now. And people need to be accountable and grow and learn and love. And that's my mom to a T. So shut up, mom. Love ya.
Amazing.
Onwards.
That's incredible. I love that. I also had a really nice conversation with my mom about the podcast, which was great. She was very excited, which is cool. But I mean, beyond moms, definitely a huge shout out and thank you to any of like friends or other people, past like coworkers and stuff that reached out and sent nice words. That was like unexpected and really cool. So yeah, I'm glad.
Yeah, man. And we're having fun doing it. Nothing better. Never better.
Totally. That is actually a good point, though, to maybe jump into the theme of this week's episode, because it is a little bit more serious than last week's. So, and kind of ties into, I think, where probably some of that slight hesitation or leaning into a bit of conflict with your mom resonates from, and that is what we're going to talk about today. And it's kind of about like masculinity and toxic masculinity. So the theme this week is a book that I just crushed, called "For the Love of Men," from toxic masculinity to a more mindful masculinity by Liz Plank. It's a book I've been wanting to read actually for a few years, and this finally gave me the opportunity or the excuse to get into it. If you're not familiar with Liz Plank, she is a like feminist influencer, I guess maybe I would describe her as. You can find her on Instagram at feministabulous or something like that. It's almost if you'd add fabulous onto the end of feminist. But very engaging content, super fun. But I was specifically kind of engaged by her content because she specifically touches on feminism, but how that affects men and how actually the feminist movement or movements between more like gender equality would actually be really beneficial for men as well. But we won't get into the whole book. It was actually a lot more dense than I expected. There's a ton of information in there. Some of it's pretty heavy. Before we begin, I just wanted to leave like a quick note about, depending on how this conversation kind of flows today, we might discuss some topics of like violence, suicide, sexual assault, and other distressing subjects. So if you feel the need to hit pause or step away, seek support, please like prioritize your well-being. So yeah, first off, I guess after that, there's
Before you get,
go ahead.
I had a quick question. When you introduced Liz Plank, I'm not familiar with her at all. So she's an influencer. She's just like someone with an opinion. She's just an armchair expert like us. No credentials for
No, sorry. I didn't mean to. I mean, influencer in the fact that she influences and is very active on social media. She's like a highly educated person. Actually, interesting. I couldn't find the place in the book because it's not really a part of the book, but she discusses how she initially got into like in university into like development politics. Like I'm a poli-sci major. And there's kind of like three different facets of political science that you can study in university. You can get into your like local politics. So for me, that would have been Canadian and super boring. You can get into international relations or like development politics. Her focus was on development politics. That was kind of also sort of what I focused on a lot. But then similarly, which I found interesting, is we both kind of in studying that became quite disillusioned, lost a lot of our like idealism, and we're like, okay, well, world's fucked. We can't actually make any difference. So she pivoted into gender studies. So this book is backed by a ton of research, a lot of like research that she's done herself, which at times, I mean, if I'm being super critical, could be a little bit anecdotal, but there's plenty of references to like actual scientific studies, other books, highly regarded people within this kind of spectrum. And yeah, so didn't mean to belittle her kind of credentials. Very legit.
Legit. She's got some clout.
Yeah, for sure. Super legit. So, and then another thing, kind of sort of a semi-disclaimer, but I think it's important to kind of talk about definitions before we get into some of these subjects. Obviously, we're going to talk about sex and gender, even though they're often used interchangeably. Sex is kind of determined by our bodies and biology when we're born, whereas gender is a social construct, so assigned to us at birth instead of being based on any kind of like biological thing, and as a construct of our society and our culture. Some other key terms that may come up, the idea that if somebody's their gender aligns with their sex, that is called cisgender. So you and I are both biological male. We both identify as biological male, so we would be cisgender. Then if you are the opposite of that, you don't identify in a number of different, like there's a few different terms for it, but that would be essentially considered transgender. And so that kind of brings us to our main topic, which is basically how these like constructs of masculinity influence men's mental health, relationships, and overall well-being.
I'm really glad that you led with those definitions, because you and I, we're just learning, and I'm sure over the course of the podcast, we're going to make some errors and some mistakes. So hit us up in the comments and call us on that. We're trying our best, but we're going to make mistakes and we want to learn. So lead on, my friend.
Yeah, that is also very key. Good point. I guess like, so the one thing I could ask at this point, I mean, these have been probably mainly because of the election that just happened down in the States, but obviously this like discussion between the difference between sex and gender is out there in society today. It can be a big like hot topic of discussion. Yeah. Like how do you see that playing out there right now?
Well, honestly, I found it truly heartbreaking to hear that the largest demographic that resulted in the presidential election outcome was, our category, basically men 18 to 36 or something like that. And that largely has to do with disillusionment on masculinity. I think that what is culturally and politically appropriate is changing for the better, and through ignorance and lack of education, this large category of young guys are feeling like left by the wayside, and it's not going well. So let's have more conversations like this. Let's have more literature like from Liz Plank, and let's show them, what a healthy, stable, masculine identity is, if that's what you want to identify as. And yeah, because it ain't what's going on down there right now. That's for damn sure.
Totally. I love that you say that. And this is like a great way to start this conversation, because I think it's very easy to point the finger at, I think some of the words you used were like ignorance and lack of education, right? And essentially what this book is saying is that it's not that. It's how we define masculinity and the pressure that's put on by society for men to act in masculine ways. So a good place to start with that is basically one of the key aspects of like what you could consider masculine is this like suppression of emotions, right? Like I'm sure you would agree it's a key thing that comes up in the book, but this idea that men must suppress their emotions and be strong and stoic is like one of the key tenets of masculinity. Would you agree?
Absolutely. And like, think about when these key tenets of masculinity were created. I mean, like, there's all kinds of these heinous, evil documents that were written millennia ago that for some reason were resistant to change. Why are people still hanging their laurels on the fucking Bible? What are the Constitution in the States, and now masculinity invented by Paul Bunyan? That's the guy with the axe and the big blue ox.
Reference. That's really funny. Yeah, I mean, definitely the Bible religion plays a large part. Another one of the key aspects of this book is that she actually argues that like toxic masculinity is kind of a religion in and of its own, and that it actually roots back to the start of agriculture and humans like settling down from nomadic hunter-gatherer tribes and developing agriculture, because at that point the relationship between men and women kind of shifts, and your home becomes and like your ability to grow food or whatever, that becomes your property. And at that point is this like shift in what it means to be masculine, which is kind of interesting. But yeah, back to that, like this key aspect is that it's like suppressing your emotions, right?
The aspect is to be tough. And in order to be tough, you have to suppress your emotion.
Yes, totally. Interestingly, it's like one of the things that comes up in the book is this idea that the like American Psychological Association, the APA, discussed that like one of the most detrimental things to someone's mental health and emotional well-being is systematically suppressing their emotions. And this is the key way that we raise boys. That is kind of scary and crazy to me. For the governing body on psychology is saying that, no, this is really bad, yet this is how we raise 50% of people in the world, is terrifying. And what it does is it leads to these like mental health challenges. So depression, anxiety, tragically high suicide rates. For example, like men die nearly 4 times more often than women in many countries. And compounded by that fact is when men are pressured by society to suppress their emotions, we're also pressured to not seek help. I mean, we've all heard that phrase of like, like men don't ask for help when they get lost. You get lost on a map, you can't find where you're going, you're not going to stop and ask for help. And this is like leads to a lot of eye rolling and frustration from women. But it's like those are things that are rooted within these like societal pressures of masculinity. So, I mean, what's one of the key like things in here is that only 30% of men who experience mental health issues seek professional help, compared to over 50% of women. And that reluctance stems from the stigma of emotional vulnerability. And that is essentially a core piece of what we call toxic masculinity. So when we get into like the rest of this discussion and think about toxic masculinity, it's those impacts of being masculine that become toxic and actually negative to themselves.
It makes so much sense. Like these emotions that you're having are natural responses from your body, and the act of ignoring those or pushing them down, of course, that's going to have a catastrophic event. Like, no brainer.
Totally. But what we see happening is that men experiencing these emotions that then, because we've grown up to suppress them instead of try to understand them, we start to feel shame, and it creates this loop of shame that fuels isolation and feelings of inadequacy, all tied to masculinity. And that just continues to discourage men from seeking help. So it just creates this shame loop where it just spirals and spirals, and the inability to cope with our emotions combined with that reluctance to seek help has just created this lethal mental health crisis.
Yeah. Like something's got to give. And these people are unfortunately reaching out for crutches like drugs and alcohol. And what a slippery slope that just comes with its whole new array of problems and puts the blinders on and really gives you no chance of solving the root problem. It's scary, man.
Mm-hmm, totally. Yeah. I mean, that's a great example of how that kind of shame then fuels further isolation and slipping into drug use, alcohol abuse to manage. And like, what do those things do, right? They continue to help you to suppress your emotions. So it doubles down. And that's that kind of like shame loop that I was talking about, of instead of thinking, how can we break out of this cycle? Men tend to double down. And that's because of this idea that even questioning the idea of masculinity is emasculine. And it becomes this like horrible loop.
Exactly.
So yeah, one of the interesting things that came out of the book was Liz Plank did like essentially just went out to like Washington Square Park, I think in New York, and was interviewing people about, she would go up to a man and ask like, hey, like when did you feel like you became a man? And then asked women like, oh, when did you feel like you became a woman? And the really interesting thing that we got is women were kind of baffled by the question. They're like, oh, I've always felt like being a woman. Like being a woman isn't something that you have to subscribe to or work on. Whereas masculinity, and she asked men, like, when did you feel like you were a man? A lot of them felt like that it was this thing that they could like never quite grasp, or if you did achieve it, it could be taken away, which is really interesting. And that what she ended up finding was that the idea of masculinity is actually underpinned by being the antithesis to the feminine. So like women are born, and if you feel like you're aligned and you're cisgender, I guess, you've been raised socially to have a female gender, you can just be female. It's not something you need to like feel like you need to prove. You're just like, oh yeah, I'm a woman. Whereas men, they felt this constant need to prove it, and the way that they did was being the opposite of feminine, which was super interesting.
Okay, so I just had a crazy thought. Like, where is the origin of this thought? Because it has to almost be something like primordial, like from an anthropological outlook. Like hunter-gatherers is the birth of humans and societies, right? Going back then, there were clearly defined gender roles. There were becoming a man, like ascension ceremonies. And that's before the influence of all of this media and modern day culture and all that toxicity. So where's the origin source of this divide? I mean, there's got to be something to, is it because we biologically have bigger, stronger bodies sometimes?
So the book gets into that as well. It's a super, super deep dive. Basically, to dance around it a little bit, is what Liz Plank looked directly at was testosterone, right? Like that's what typically people point that picture to is it's the higher levels of testosterone in a man's body make them more aggressive, make them more violent, make them bigger, make them stronger, all those kind of ideas. But through some of the like research that she described, it's actually quite interesting in reframing the idea of actually what that means and what testosterone actually does. One of the key things was they did this experiment where it was essentially like playing a game of Risk, right? So you're like, you have this game board and you're trying to like dominate and take over the world. And what they did was they had men, people who identify as men, people who identified as women play this game. And what they discovered is that when people participating in this study were told that the researchers were going to know what gender they were and what their name was, the women were less likely to drop bombs within this like game structure. But when they were told that it was anonymous, women actually dropped more bombs than men, which is surprising, right? Like you would think, based on what we understand or think we understand about testosterone, that it's this like biological thing within us, within men, that makes us more aggressive. So essentially what they discovered, and to loop around it a little bit, is that testosterone doesn't make you more violent and aggressive. It makes you more competitive. So in some different alternative studies, they essentially tried to like rig the system where men would feel that their competitive advantage would be to actually be more cooperative, more emotional. They then excelled in those areas instead of being more aggressive and violent. So I think
Very cool.
yeah. So I think you're right in that idea, in that there is a biological component, but I think historically we've misunderstood exactly what that is and how we can lean into that and reshape those desires for competitiveness or to excel, and reshape, if we can reframe what it means to be masculine within society, we can actually use it for good, which is super cool.
That is really cool. I love that angle about testosterone fueling competition and not any of those other more triggering, like, more negative words like aggression or violence or things like that. Just simply competition. Competition can be positive. Competition is positive. Super cool.
Yeah. Very, very interesting.
Yeah, and I can totally see how it's just got more warped and distorted since like the dawn of humans to now, and like so many things, we just need to take another look at it through our current lens and adjust. And like we've identified that the current system isn't working, so let's find one that does. And maybe if us and a couple other wackos have more conversations like this, the seed will start to spread.
Totally, right?
Does Liz talk about the path forward?
Yeah, exactly. So it's very clear thing, right? If we talk about the shame that men feel for suppressing their emotions, the obvious antithesis to that is to express our emotions, understand them, naming our emotions. It was really interesting for me. As you know, I've been working with a therapist for a good few months now, just to help me. I finally felt like the straw that broke the camel's back this last year with some of the challenging things that went on. I just felt the need to seek help in lots of different ways. through the medical field, where it's other specialists, whatever, with some of the stuff I had going on. And one of the things was like seeking out a clinical counselor. And one of the first things that I was kind of asked or instructed to do was create a list of values. So there was essentially like this little book that I could flip through of examples of different values. So one would be like family or health or fitness or fun, whatever. Like there was, I think there was like 150 different things. And the thing that I had to do was like flip through and decide on my top 10. One of the interesting things to come out of this is one of the things, I think it was like fourth on my list, was provide. And reading this book, it was really interesting to look back on that now and try to think about like, what is desire? Like, is that something that I actually value that highly, this like need to provide? Or is this like a societal thing that's been trained into me? Is that like, the man needs to provide, which I will need to ruminate on some more. But a really interesting concept of like, it's essentially what Liz Plank's saying we should do, right? It's like look and understand our emotions and our values and try to understand them better.
Yeah, super cool. In the context of providing, I couldn't feel like that was less of a priority for me in the traditional sense, like financially, but I think that you provide in a relationship in a lot of different ways.
Totally. One of the interesting things that I was kind of ruminating on in this book, to touch on that idea of providing, is for me, like, yeah, maybe there was a financial component, but like at the end of the day, it wasn't just about having money. It's about that like security and safety, right? And one of the interesting things that I've been thinking on a lot is take somebody like Jordan Peterson, right? Super controversial person. And his argument within this aspect would be things that he's written in the past would be some of the violence that we've seen perpetrated by men. There's the example of the guy in Toronto that like drove a van through a bunch of people or whatever. And he basically came out and said his reasoning was because he identified as an incel, right? Involuntarily celibate. And he was angry at women for not giving the attention that he felt like he deserved. And sickeningly, Jordan Peterson's response was that women should be more open to these men, and that one of the ways that we can solve one of the ways that we can solve this problem is essentially like a mandatory like coupling of people, which is just so disgusting and backwards and doesn't make sense at all.
That is some heinous bullshit. What is the role of women in helping to redefine masculinity in 2024? Because I think there is one.
There is one for sure. And I would argue, and to get back to the kind of this idea about providing is, I think that actually the best way that men can provide for women is to be vocal and ensure that they have equal opportunity to healthcare that we do, and the healthcare services that they want, for a very clear and pointed example, and allow them to seek out the lives that they want to do, whether that's, going to work and pursuing a career, and not fulfilling necessarily that traditional role of being a homemaker if they don't want to, right? To me, that's providing, and being masculine is supporting a woman in her wants and needs and desires, not forcing them to be some traditional idea of what a woman is.
Absolutely. And another one that just came to mind for me is fostering safety, like being more men a safe place for women to go instead of the complete opposite that it currently is. Like, this occurred to me a couple years ago that I have honestly never experienced fear in the same way that 50% of the population has. What's scary to me? Like exorcism movies and ghosts and shit like that. I've never walked home at night and been scared, literally never. And all the women in my life who I love endlessly, this is like often a daily occurrence for them. And it's just to know that I have a role in this is sad and also empowering. And I just want to kick these guys in gear and wake them up. So,
Yeah.
yeah, it's
The one interesting thing that wasn't like directly touched on in the book is like how a more mindfully masculine person can like directly kind of combat those traditionally like negative ideas of masculinity, other than just like continuing this idea of community and being like actively being mindfully masculine, whether that's embracing vulnerability, compassion, emotional awareness, and redefining what that idea of being a successfully male person is in this more holistic sense. So it's less about attacking it head on, but more approaching this idea of being more mindfully masculine and then bringing that back to your community, which I really like.
Yeah. So you did the deep dive. This is your topic this week, but I hit some spark notes. And one of the things that I thought was interesting, and correct me if I'm misquoting, but Liz says that another way in which women can help this masculinity crisis is in controlling what they're looking for from a masculine partner, and also controlling the way in which they behave in that relationship. So relationships take two, and just know your worth. And
Yeah, I think the key thing with that point is that's not placing blame on women either, right? It's this idea that these like social and societal like constructs for femininity and masculinity affect all of us, right? Like women aren't immune to the societal ideas of what a man is, right? So it's also for them to try and accept and reframe this idea, which is an interesting concept. One of the things she brings up is like, where's the feminist movement equivalent for men, right? Like women have progressed the idea of what it means to be feminine. You know, it's more acceptable for a woman to have a men's name, like Charlie, for example, to wear pants, to exist as, you know, like a term I kind of don't really like, but like these boss babes, right? Like it's become acceptable and a part of femininity to embrace these things that maybe were like traditionally masculine, but where's that movement for men, and how do we get there?
dude, I know what the masculine movement is. The masculine movement is the feminist movement. There should be no difference. I am honestly terrified of the concept of the branding behind what an actual masculine movement could be. To be masculine is to be a feminist, and let's just spread the education around that right there.
Totally. Yeah. And that's the idea of, right, is like the idea of how we fix this is to try and be less toxically masculine and more mindfully masculine. We give ourselves permission to be human and less strong and stoic. And I mean, it's really important, right? Like one of the key things in this book is that this idea is like literally killing us quicker. I mean, like men who conform to these ideas of what masculine norms are experience more stress-related illness, more heart disease, more hypertension. And we've got to break these patterns, right? Like one of the things she said is like, do physically fit people stop going to the gym? No, it takes constant work, and so does your mental health.
Absolutely.
So like where to go from here is essentially like the next thing into this idea of like community and connection, right? So it's great to do these mindfulness exercises, whether it's meditating, try to understand your emotions. Maybe reading this book would be a great place to start for people, or like trying to understand where to start. But the next big thing is that this like idea of for men like leads to a lot of isolation and loneliness. So nearly 15% of men aged 35 to 49, which I am now a member of that bracket, unfortunately, they report having no close friends. That social isolation is linked to a 29% increase in mortality risk. So the key thing there is like, ask for help, whether it's with a professional, your family, your friends. You take that first step to understanding your emotions. And then when you're things that you're struggling with, like seek out that community and have those conversations.
And I guarantee that the person that you reach out to, that buddy of yours, like they're in a similar boat, and they're going to be grateful that you were the one that took the charge in opening that conversation. At the beginning, we talked about what the response was to our first episode. And something that I forgot to mention was a couple of buddies reached out and, acknowledged that, we haven't been good at keeping in touch. And yeah, we're all in the same boat.
Totally, man. And for me, one of the key things that I did this year, which is this exact thing, right? Like leaning on my community, is going through a tough time. And one of the scariest fucking things that I did was be open about it to my employers. That was scary as hell. And like, so I mean, some of the things that are talked about in this book is how actually that can negatively impact you at work. Men in a management positions
Absolutely.
that like seek direction are then actually thought of as more weak. Statistically, I'm very lucky to be employed at a place where that I specifically was looking for it, because I was wanting to be super true to my values. And there's a reason why I work there, and a reason why I respect those people, and a reason why I was open about what I was going through this year. And interestingly, like just a bit of that, I won't get into any of the details because it's somebody else's like private information, but you know, so somebody at work opened up to me and discussed like of a different generation, talked about being in a similar like challenging mental state, and without having the tools to seek out that help for what they needed mentally, physically injured themselves to give themselves that break, because that was an acceptable way for a man to take a break, which is like
so sad.
So sad. So, but the vulnerability, like that's huge growth to even share that with me in one, and then recognize that like, no, I've been through a similar experience, and we need to support Dev now and what he needs. And I will forever be thankful for that, not only that opportunity they gave me, but the bravery and courage within myself to be that vulnerable, like literally cry in front of my bosses at work. And then the validation of receiving that support was incredible, man. Incredible.
Dude, that's amazing. And you cannot put a price on that. Just like how a company that supports their employees like that, you have bought loyalty for life. And again, you
100%.
can't put a price on that either. On the other side of the spectrum, like last episode, I talked about, you know, cutting relationships that are more harm than good and really leaning on to the ones that are mutually supportive. I think that everyone should look at their employers almost first and foremost in that scenario, because we're most of the time giving a minimum of 40 hours a week to this person. So who are we really working for? And I acknowledge that I was in a real position of privilege to be able to leave a job recently when I found out that I was working for a toxic male. And yeah, I got out of there real quick and never looked back.
Yeah, man. And the key there too is, if you are one of those people in a position of power, you're managing other people, be that person they can come to, right? We can expect more from employers, but if you are an employer or a manager or whoever, you have the real power in that situation to be open to your employees. And as I said, like it's better for their health. It's better for their loyalty to you. You know, like I'm be open. I'm taking a bit of a break from work, and I know that when I go back, I am going to be a way better employee than I was when I was like in the midst of it, grinding through each day and really struggling mentally. And that's a benefit to your employer, right?
1,000,000%. It seems obvious, but it's not yet.
And that's the key, right? And the next point here is to create these spaces where it is safe to share and support each other. I mean, we've outlined it as one of the key kind of ideals behind this podcast. I know my long-term hope is like that we can build a community of people that listen to this podcast and want to be involved with what we do, and then create like a communication system, whatever that might be, for all of those people in some sort of like safe and moderated environment, where if you like want to come in and talk about golf, you can talk about why you didn't like Gladiator 2, or talk about like your deep emotions or things that you're struggling with and seeking out support and help. That's like the goal, right? If we can get there, I will like feel so amazing about that.
Yeah, absolutely. A small little resource amongst a whole toolkit that we need to better ourselves. Just a resource of like-minded guys. Like, we'll start this movement. We'll start the feminist movement, and see who joins us.
Feminist? Maybe that's the word for it.
Damn. Yeah, that's not bad. I like that.
Yeah, not bad.
Feminist on Discord. Let's go.
But one of the cool things too is that, like, the research shows in this book, like, if you are practicing these things. It's going to make your life better. It's going to make your relationships better. One of the like most highly respected researchers in terms of like love and relationship is John Gottman, Dr. John Gottman of the Gottman Institute. I've read a few read a few of their books. Sarah and I read them together. One of the things that we did when we first started dating, seeing each other, was read this book called 8 Dates, which was awesome. If you're in a relationship and you're like looking for something to do together, I think we took like turns like reading one chapter to each other and then trying to implement those things in our life, which was just like incredible for building this like really solid foundation to our relationship. But the math and statistics backs up what we're saying, is that one of the key things that in the book here was that like men who resist their partner's influence have an 81% chance of the marriage not surviving. Huge.
Yeah, I mean, it's called a partnership for a reason. Like, let's both come to the table equally and progress.
Yes, totally. And one of the ways that we can like get there and build these stronger communities is actually through gender equality, like we've touched on, right? The most like meaningful decrease that we can make in societal violence and to sustain peace is this idea of gender equality. And I hate some of the like rhetoric and propaganda that's spouting out there in the world right now. And this idea that if women have more freedom, that somehow means less freedom for men, or if people of like a different race or color have more freedoms, that somehow means less freedoms for white people. Like, it doesn't work that way. If we are all have more freedoms and more equality, it's better for all of us.
Obvious, yet not. I don't get it, man.
Yeah, no. And honestly, one of the scary things that, and I touched on a little bit, I think that like what kind of scared me are like For You page on TikTok after like using the hashtag men's health, the amount of like essentially like right-wing propaganda that was popping up in our For You page. And that's another one of the things that comes up in the book. And I mean, there's so many different things, but it's this idea, it's like, that's how these extremist groups, whether you want to go like fully to the side of like ISIS, right, is like they prey on this idea of what it means to be masculine and gaining back control over your life and all of these things that are making these men in these countries or cultures like feel less manly because of these ridiculous ideals of what it means to be a man that are essentially entirely unattainable. It's used as a tool to get these like young, impressionable men into a place where they feel they have community and inclusion. Like, one of the people that had a little excerpt in this book was actually a like reformed white supremacist who was like severely abused as a child, ended up eventually in jail, and was like considered the statistically the most violent prisoner in Wisconsin or something like that. Like, was a really like damaged individual, and fell into this gang essentially because they provided him with safety for the first time in his life. And then once he had that safety, he was in, and then he felt like he owed it to this gang to do the things that they wanted to do. And that eventually obviously led him to be in jail. But one of the saddest things is what eventually led to his reformation. And now he's like this huge activist for men and for people, like, so like essentially the opposite of the white supremacy movement. Was the one person who changed his life was a social worker who, when he was in isolation, came to visit him. And instead of entering the cell, like the guards would do, actually knocked on the cell door and asked for permission to enter. And that tiny act was enough to make this man feel safe and heard and like he had a voice. And it's to the point where he actually like accused this social worker of brainwashing him because he didn't understand the emotions he was feeling because he had never experienced them. So that's where like there's the community that we're talking about building and making the safe space for men to talk about their emotions. The opposite of that exists, and it's powerful. Like, it's out there and it's doing its thing. And so if we don't try to counteract it, it's gonna take over.
Well, let's look at this as an opportunity and push off disbelief for a moment. And sure, there's some radical leaders of these groups that are maybe, let's say, beyond saving. But I want to argue that the majority of these people are just lost, like you said, looking for community. And let's give them what they're looking for and influence them positively. We have identified the proof is in the media, massive category of people in the States specifically. So if it's in the States, it's in Canada. It's just a tenth of the population. Yeah, let's bring them over to the light side. The feminist movement. Welcome, gentlemen.
Exactly. If you want to be healthier,
join now and prosper.
You want to have a better relationship with the people in your life, or like
get laid more.
The statistics are out there. You want to have a better, longer lasting marriage. The idea is to like break out of this social construct of what it means to be a man, talk about your emotions, be vulnerable, seek out that community. Yes, it's hard, but I mean, I'm putting my hand up. I'm here. I'm willing to. I'm not a professional. If you feel like you need professional help, definitely seek that out. I'm not that person, but we've got to start somewhere, and let's do it.
Yeah, man. You weren't kidding when you introduced this topic. It is deep. My brain right now is feeling like stretched to the limit, and my heart's feeling a little sad knowing that we have a massive uphill battle ahead of us. Not just us and what we want to achieve, but just society as a whole. But we're going to get there because optimism is key.
Totally. I know we said we weren't really going to talk about politics on this podcast, but we have every time. So I'm going to dip into it lightly. But in relation to this book, one of the interesting things was this was written just after 2016. So when Trump was first elected. And this idea, or the statistics show that people who prescribe to this more traditional gender roles, and this idea of a traditional family home and that sort of thing, are more likely to reject a strong woman. So I would argue, and we've seen this happen again with our latest election here in 2024, this idea, these things spouted by right-wing news organizations like Fox News, all this rhetoric about the traditional family and these traditional family roles, I don't think that has become a public discourse by chance. I think the powers that be in the GOP have looked at these statistics, looked at these studies, and they knew that Trump would win against a female candidate if they push this idea of traditional families and traditional gender roles, because that leads to people more opposed to a strong female leader. I might be wrong. It's maybe jumping to some conclusions, maybe giving them more credit than they're due.
It's a great theory. Well, if there's anything that they have acutely showed us in the last little while, is that the people who we thought were supposed to have our backs, they don't at all. So I wouldn't doubt it.
Yeah, 100%. All right. Anyway, that was a big fucking topic. Okay, let's get into our weekly affirmations.
Some lighter topics.
Yeah. Let's get to the fun stuff.
Yeah. Let's laugh and smile and brush that off.
So I guess
until next week.
We introduced this last time, but now since episode 2, the start of our weekly affirmations is we're going to jump into how we did with our goal of the week from last week. So why don't you remind us of yours and let us know how you did?
Yeah, man. So in recording podcast world, there's a lot of time travel required. So we recorded this exactly a week ago, and then that left me about 3 or 4 weekdays to execute my daily goal of waking up in the morning, Monday to Friday, and sitting down with 30 minutes of uninterrupted creative writing time. And I joked about how I was going to write you guys a poem, which I did. I was really conflicted over how I was going to approach this. And if I was going to maybe say, yeah, I woke up every morning and I did my 30 minutes to kind of set this off on a positive track. But honesty over everything, I didn't. It slipped my mind. Life got in the way. I got busy, and I only started today. So this morning, I woke up and I did my 30 minutes creative writing. I wrote a poem. I'll get to that after. Ultimately, it was an amazing process. It was a great way to start the day. I really loved the act of, connecting to that right brain, being creative, sipping my coffee. Instead of the normal way I wake up, I look at my fucking work emails. I think about how sad I am that I have to go and work instead of play with my puppy or create art or just be a human living in Eden. So yeah, anyways, it was a great start. Here's the poem. No. Let's you do your recap now, and then then we'll pull them after.
Okay. I had a similar experience. Mine was I wanted to commit to a routine for the week, but then we immediately head into the weekend, which is always a little bit more challenging. But I did like generally okay. These weren't like super lofty goals. The one thing I was influenced by you wanting to like write and journal more, and I didn't end up doing that. But I would argue I had to do a decent amount of research for this podcast, and I took a lot of notes doing that. So if I incorporate that, and then I think I did pretty well.
Good. Well, we're going to get into our goals for next week at the end, but I'm going to continue with my goal from last week until I complete a full week, because accountability.
Mm-hmm.
So there is no such thing as a perfect line, yet still each day I dream of mine. 1 cup left and just past the altar, a cluttered mind and you'll surely falter. But in that moment of vain, simply get out of your head and reframe. A straight shot down the fairway is good, but I'm daydreaming about being the dad I know I could. It does not matter if you make a bad shot. What matters is family. It matters a lot. So just like in golf, with eyes on the target and calm, and build a life for your babies, free of all qualm. Dr. Seuss, Anthony Walsh, Finney.
Wayne Gretzky, Michael Scott.
Yes.
I love it. That's great. I'm so glad you did that. Okay, next, jump into our moment of awe. Mine was kind of a fun one. One of the random things that we did this week is I can't remember what sparked it, but I really felt like I wanted to rewatch the movie Juno. It's been like a long time, and I rewatched it with Sarah. We discussed how like I really think it was like a culturally iconic movie. I think like the time that it was released, 2007. Like sparked something culturally, which was pretty cool. But I was hit with this crazy moment. So 2007, I was 19. So the movie comes out. Obviously at that point in my life, more feel like I am sympathetic to or feel like the characters of Juno and Bleecker. You know, you're like essentially a young kid. I mean, I had graduated high school by that point, but was still a fucking kid. And rewatching this movie, all of a sudden clicked, and I realized now watching it, I way more sympathize with the like Jason Bateman, Jennifer Garner characters who are like married and like the complications of a marriage and trying to have kids, and that whole thing was like a total mind fuck. It was like, I don't know if I'd experienced it quite that like obviously, but it was just like, whoa, okay, I'm no longer like sympathizing with the kid in this show. I'm sympathizing with the adults, and that was pretty wild.
Struck by your own mortality, right in the kisser.
Totally.
That's a good one. And I like that it wasn't in like the traditional sense, like staring at pretty things, which mine is again this week. Walking Alba down the local creek trail around my house here, which I do every day, so that's not the awe part, but I missed through her ball and it took a bunch of bounces into the creek, and I had to go down there, like walk off the trail in the muddy, being careful, and look in the dark, trying to squint and find the ball, and getting down on my knees and trying to find the ball in this not complete dark and silence. I found so many cool things down there, like little trails that I could see that were taken by various sizes of animals. When you get down close to the water, you can see all the things going on in there. Like even in the winter, there's still some water striders. And it just made me realize that when you take a moment to slow down and be present, especially in moments that you take for granted or in unlikely situations, you can find beauty in everything. And that was my moment of awe this week. Unfortunately, I couldn't retrieve the ball, and
oh no,
Alba's gutted, but
poor Alba.
There's more where that came from.
I love that. I also like really enjoy those moments. I had a similar experience. I think it was last winter or the winter before, but you know, you take your dog out for a walk and they're always like sniffing these certain spots, and sometimes they get like stuck on a spot. I'm sure Alba does that as well. Lou definitely does that. You always think like, what are you smelling? Like, why are you sniffing that like specific blade of grass? You know, like what happened there? And I remember this one day we had this like light dusting of snow, and I took Lou out for this walk, and there was all of a sudden like squirrel trails and raccoon prints, and realizing that he had been experiencing this world that I couldn't see at all, like all year round. He's smelling those trails of, oh, this is where the raccoon went, this is where the squirrel went. And I was totally oblivious to it. I mean, I don't have the nose of a dog, so it's fair. But it was this like cool reminder that there's this like whole world happening around us that we often don't see. And it sounds like it was similar to your experience.
Absolutely, man. Very cool. What were you grateful for?
I am grateful for this week for my book club. I'm a member of a book club. Actually, I started initially the book club at work back in March of this year, I think it was. For those of you out there that don't know, I work in like the wine industry here in the Okanagan. We've had a bit more of a challenging year this year, because of a heavy cold snap last year. Basically, all of the grapes in the whole valley were destroyed. And plus, because of a lot of reasons, I think inflation, a bit of a lag after like a bunch of people, Canadians traveled here during COVID, which is where you get like 90% of our tourism comes from like local, like Vancouver, Calgary, that sort of thing. So during those COVID periods where people couldn't travel overseas, a lot of people came here. So I think people that are traveling are maybe choosing to go elsewhere, further afield now these days. Then coupled with inflation, higher costs for doing things, then the province of BC enacted those like Airbnb rules. So now we like have less Airbnb or like affordable places to stay in Kelowna for tourists. Basically, all of those things combined led to like a super challenging year within the wine industry. So support your local winery. But one of the things that we like randomly came up to do to try and like get different people coming in and experiencing the winery was starting a book club, which is fun. I ran that for a couple of months. And then eventually, long story short, one of my coworkers ended up kind of like taking over what was that existing book club, melding it with like a different one that they were starting up. But I say it's my thing that I'm grateful for because it's really cool. It's run by these like four girls. They choose 2 books every month. They are definitely things that I wouldn't normally pick up off of the bookshelf. There's like some pretty like feminist topics. I think all of the books so far have been like predominantly about women, and the vast majority of people who attend are female. And so that's been like a really interesting thing to kind of like be involved in, is just like, again, like we're talking about like creating this community, being more vulnerable. I'm really enjoying like attending the book clubs, listening to what these women have to say, and just like understanding their perspective a little bit more in life and the things that they struggle with and go through. And I hope that it's making me a better person, a better partner. It's super fun. I would highly suggest doing it to anybody out there. Like, get out of your comfort zone, go find a book club, join it. Even if you feel like you don't fit in, sometimes that's the best. So yeah, that's what I'm grateful for. Book club.
Cool, man. That sounds fun. You said book club so many times there. It was really given. We've got the greatest book club. There's no greater book club. You'll love our book club. But
it is the best.
But
booked and busy. Okay.
But that's cool.
Join it.
Yeah. I got to listen to my books these days. I'm a stoner and I just cannot read a book. Working on that. Grateful. I am, again, low-hanging fruit, but this past week particularly, I'm really grateful for my health. You know, I love a weekend day where, you know, I can play soccer, I can hit the driving range, I can go to the gym all in one day, and then wake up feeling right as rain the next day. I haven't had a drink of alcohol in 6 months, and I think that's a real big factor towards it. And yeah, I am grateful for it, but you can't take it for granted. Physical health, if you don't use it, you lose it. So I won't be losing mine, that's for sure.
That's so good, man. I'm envious. I can't wait to get back there. One of the things that I'm kind of like struggling with my health stuff right now is this like inability to do it's like I can't remember the proper term for it, but and like I have some physical limitations that I didn't have before. But actually, one of the people who reached out commented on one of our posts of the podcast was the guy who manages my soccer team, and said he wants me back out there, which was nice to hear. I think it's going to be a little bit longer, but I appreciated that.
You'll get there in no time, and then when you do, you can be grateful for your health too.
Totally. And you know what? I'm finding different avenues. Maybe, you know, if some of this stuff is more lingering and long term, I'm coming to terms with that. I can still golf. I can still walk, to live a very fulfilled life. So I'm happy either way. But next up is
Amazing.
our dream/nightmare blunt rotation this week, because I brought the theme. I get to do the dream blunt rotation, which is fun. So again, let's start off with the negative and then end with the positive. So what's your nightmare blunt rotation for the week?
Starting off with the negative. Okay. My nightmare blunt rotation is my grade 6 elementary school teacher, Miriam Whitesmith. I referred to her as Miss Whitesmith during the day. There's no better word for that woman than a bully. Not everyone should be a teacher, and this gal is a prime example of it. So obviously, back then I didn't have my life experience and a frame of reference to understand what these behaviors were and what was really happening. But looking back on it now, very strange, evil, manipulative woman who shouldn't have been molding the minds of teachers. And the fact that I still hold some trauma over that, like 25 years later, is not that long. I'm not that old, is the prime example of it.
Mm-hmm.
Do you ever remember the concept of being a kid and thinking your teachers are like the authority, the be all end all? And, then you grow up and your friends are teachers, and there's no better perspective than that.
Shout out Daddy Dylan.
Shout out to Mr. and Mrs. Carlene, the greatest teachers around. And they're just starting the cutest, amazing little family ever. I love them so much.
Oh man,
so,
imagine if DK was your teacher. That would have been unreal.
Dude. So cool.
Yeah.
So
talk
that
about
bully, Miss Whitesmith.
Sorry to jump in, but talk about a man that is a good example of being vulnerable, emotionally communicative. What a good example. I love that guy. Shout out DK, miss you, buddy.
He should be the poster boy for modern day masculine. Absolutely.
Hell yeah.
Not a bad ego bone in that guy's body.
Totally.
Okay, so the bully, Miss Whitesmith, passes it over to the ghost of Richard Nixon. Yeah, it's kind of obvious why he's in my nightmare blunt rotation. Man, the war on drugs, reefer madness. He was the one that coined cannabis as marijuana to make it sound more Mexican and like to deter people that way. Marijuana is it has like a negative racial connotation. So if that's your main way of referring to the jazz cabbage, I encourage you to change it. Cannabis, that's how it started. That's what it is. Okay, so the ghost of Richard Nixon then passes it to Guy Fieri. There's no person that I like smoking blunts with least than people that suck all over that thing and pass you back a soggy doobie. So Guy Fieri is going to be licking his fingers and schlobbing all over that thing. So no, nightmare. And where is this nightmare rotation going to be happening? It's going to be happening at like one of the most like heinous restaurants you can think of, like at an Olive Garden or something.
Ooh, that's hilarious. That's very funny.
That's all I got for you.
Do you know what I wish? Because I liked how our last podcast, if you watch the video, anybody out there, you put up like little pictures of people. It would be so funny if you had a picture of that teacher. I would like probably cry from laughing.
I'll find it in the archives. I'll go ask my mom for my grade 6 school photo and I'll crop it. Like the good thing is I know that she's dead now, but yeah, I wish I could have met her while she was still living to just give her a stern talking to.
Yeah, I've always had this theory that people interested in working with children fall into two types. Ones who like generally love kids and want to like mold their minds in a positive way, or people that are just lazy and seek control over other people, and kids is the easiest avenue to do that. That's my theory.
It's a weird power dynamic. The wrong people could really let that get to their heads for sure.
For sure. Okay, anyway.
A boss of the worst kind.
Let's jump into the dream blunt rotation. I hope you at least know who one of my people are this week. So you definitely won't know all of them. But okay, I'm very much gone with a space theme. I love reading sci-fi. So actually this guy right here, that like green, yellow, blue, and red book is written by him.
That guy.
Yeah, and you can put his face there. I'm going to butcher his name. I don't know how to say it properly. He's a Chinese author named Chichin Liu. I don't know if that's how you say it, but he wrote this like really like mind-blowing, like kick-ass sci-fi series that I'm obsessed with that is very cool. Next person I would want to include is Carl Sagan, RIP. He was the person responsible for the Voyager missions that they like sent out, those little like antenna things to take photos of like the planets and send them back to Earth or whatever. He was given the task of putting on this like, so these Voyager satellites were just like shot out into space, and they're like now have exited our solar system. So they're the furthest man-made created thing like out there in the universe. So they thought at the time, let's put like something to try and represent humanity on this thing. And so it was Carl Sagan's job to like come up with what those things are. And if you research it, there's lots of cool stuff that they did, which is really interesting. And so obviously he would have some pretty cool conversations about space. Then the third person would be Neil deGrasse Tyson, who I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of, but he has a really great way of like dumbing down like really heavy like physics topics to make them like palatable to like people like me. So I think that would be like this really crazy, like mind-bending experience with the three of them. And I decided that we would be out in the middle of the forest somewhere where it's like very, very dark and you can see the stars like perfectly. And we would have this like high-powered telescope there. So yeah, kind of nerdy, but that's my dream blunt rotation for the week.
That is a dream, dude. That's a great lineup. And you know Neil parties.
Dude, Neil is down. He'll roll another one and keep him going. Okay, cool. I'm glad you knew who Neil was. That's at least one person. Okay.
I know who Carl is too. But
okay, good,
yeah.
good. Okay, goals of the week. I know you said you're going to continue yours. I'm also going to try and continue mine, but there's no reason not to like add more things on top of it. So mine is mine is going to be to try and get out of the house a little bit more, try and be a bit more social. Obviously talked a little bit about it here, some of the struggles I've had this year. And so I've been a little bit locked down, for a little while, just kind of like managing some of my fatigue and working on a lot of this like singular focus stuff, just trying to get better. But I've really turned a corner within the last kind of couple weeks here. I am really happy with how, even though as like relaxed it is, like the stresses that come along with like this podcast and like doing things, there's times where it's like we're putting a decent amount of effort into it. And I've been handling that really well. Been feeling a lot less anxiety and stress, been in a lot less pain. I'm going to get out of the house a little bit more. Shout out to my bro, Andy, who's moving to Vancouver soon. We're going to go grab some wings this evening. Excited to hang out with him. So try and do that more.
Awesome, man. That's great. Yeah. So since I didn't do great on last week's goal, I'm going to carry that over and I'm going to get 4 consecutive days of morning creative writing. And since that's a lofty goal in itself, I'm going to have a shorter, more operationally definable, quick one. And I'm just going to go for a new PR at the gym. I'm going to do a 365 1 rep squat, and that should be achievable.
Beast. Love it.
Okay. Cool. So now we just got to wrap this up in a tight little bow. Nice, concise conclusion.
Yeah. Anyway, I guess like thanks for anybody who listens. Hopefully we can, anybody who listened to the first one will listen again, reach a few more people this time. I know you're going to come up with some more great clips for social media and get those out there. And definitely if you are liking what you're listening to, give us, as they say, give us a subscribe, give us a like, leave a comment, all that kind of good stuff. Definitely helps with engagement and all that. So yeah. Thanks for listening.
Yeah. And share it to your friends. And here's maybe an even more difficult challenge. Why don't you share today's episode if there are any people in your life that you think are in extra need of hearing this one?
For sure. And to build that community, man, like that's a big one. If you like share this, if you're willing to be an open participant in this new community of being vulnerable, sharing your emotions, all that good stuff. Yeah.
Thanks, guys.